Well, if they wanted farmers to pay tax, they could actually govern us properly and allow us to pay income tax, because at the minute we don't earn enough money to do that. If the government don't change tax, they are in a very risky situation, because you're seeing farmers and the NFU, landowners and the CLA, and even environmentalists. George Monbiot has come out criticising the government for stopping capital grants. So you're seeing this unholy alliance of farmers, landowners, urban environmentalists, all of whom have very different cultures, all of whom have very different interests, and generally all of whom hate each other, and they're coming together against the government, which just shows how incompetent their management of these issues are.
Ollie, you are part of a farming family,
Yep.
But you also run a YouTube channel. Tell us about that to educate people. You understand this topic probably better than anybody else here today.
Yeah, so I suppose you could say I'm a rural historian. I have a YouTube channel called Farming Explained, which is trying to talk through every element of the countryside and rural life and the food system. So far we've mostly focused on history, but that does mean that I have a long view of what's going on at the minute, which is worthwhile.
So you can put this in a really great historical context. Is there any comparison, looking back, to what the farmers in this country are facing at the moment?
Well, since the agricultural revolution, there had been a conflict between landowners and farmers who were their tenants. And Lloyd George put a death duty tax on aristocratic estates, so a very similar thing to what we're seeing now, but it only hit the very wealthy. And that was progressive because it broke up their estates and allowed normal farmers, people like my family, to buy land. So my village has been farmed since the Roman times, but only since 1919, in the aftermath of this death duty tax, was it broken up and sold off to farmers. It's only been farmed by people who actually own the land since 1919 for 105 years. So in historical terms, the fact that we are here as workers and as owners of the means of production is actually really unusual. So we're here defending that, trying to stop this tax, which is regressive. It's attacking us and not the rich landowners. The rich landowners have exemptions through things called national heritage assets, which means that if you're so rich essentially that it's considered culturally significant, they won't charge inheritance tax on your estate. And of course they put their assets in trust and they put their assets in limited companies, and those things don't die. This is only attacking the small people like us.
Some people would say, well, farmers are rich, even the likes of your family. They still have a lot of land, they have a lot of assets compared to other people. So why should you have the luxury of being able to keep your assets?
DEFRA's own figures show that the return on capital employed in farming is 0.5% of the value. And this tax, 20% over 10 years, is 2% a year. So from the government's own figures, they're asking us to put 4 times the amount of money we can make farming aside to pay this tax, which means that we're all going to be in the red. We just can't pay it.
Who's going to own your farms if you all have to sell them in the next 20, 50 years? Who are they going to go to?
Well, in our case, we have quite a small farm. So if my father was to die unexpectedly, we'd have to sell a parcel of 2 or 3 fields perhaps. But that parcel of land on its own won't be big enough to be a viable farm, but it will be worth less than £1 million, which means that somebody could still buy that as an investment, get 100% inheritance tax relief. And of course that means more people are going to be able to exploit this mechanism to avoid tax, and more people will be looking to do that, which will keep the value of land high, and it just perpetuates. This is not very well thought through at all.
I keep hearing that. The farmers' frustration seems to lie in not the fact that you have to pay tax. Every farmer I talk to says, well, of course we pay tax. We're happy to pay tax. That's what living in this country is. It's this discrepancy between the numbers and the figures is what is driving you all to be here today. It's as though you want to sit down with Rachel Reeves and say, can I just give you a maths lesson and explain why you've got this wrong, and hopefully then the light bulb will go on. Is it likely to happen, Ollie?
Well, if they wanted farmers to pay tax, they could actually govern us properly and allow us to pay income tax, because at the minute we don't earn enough money to work very hard his whole life, and he hasn't paid very much income tax at all, you see, whereas the middlemen make a lot of money. If they just regulated the supermarkets and we were paid a fair price, it wouldn't necessarily cost the government anything in subsidies. It would allow us to make a profit, and then we would be paying tax as all businesses do.
You see, people would be baffled to hear that. They would say, well, hang on a minute, if you work so hard and you don't make enough money to pay any income tax, why are you doing it?
You don't do it for the money. It's a way of life. You do it for your animals. Your animals are more important than your family and a wage. You have to look after them. And that's why I'm here. I'm here to keep it going and to stand with my people as they fight for their continued existence.
I think what this has really shone a light on, for me particularly, is this subculture of farming in this country, and how sort of beautiful that is, and how incredibly collaborative that you all are, and how close you all are. And there's something about working with the land, and maybe it's working with animals, which mean that you really grasp this. It's like a spiritual significance, if that doesn't sound like I'm over-egging the pudding a little.
Well, it's a connection to nature and to each other. I think it's a very genuine community. But we are, as you touched on, a socio-economic minority, and we are stereotyped. People think that we're stupid, people think that we're wealthy, obviously no help from the government on that one, which I think is a shame. There's no ism for discrimination against rural people, but everyone is aware of these negative stereotypes that we have to deal with, which I think is a shame. But I am very proud to stand here with my people. I think what we're doing is wonderful, and I feel there is a genuine sense of community and coming together at these events, which I'm glad to be a part of.
There was a protest here just a few weeks ago. Ollie Harrison was saying he thought there were 45,000 people here that day. If you watch the BBC's coverage, you'd think there was about 45 people here that day. We're going to have 500 tractors maybe along Whitehall this morning. But what next, Ollie? Where does this ramp up to? Will you stop production? Will there be the equivalent, effectively, of a farmer's strike?
Well, I understand that people have already been refusing to take sewage, sludge and pellets and that sort of stuff. So there's definitely already a bit of civil disobedience. This is an escalation. I think it would be difficult to deny that. I think it would be wise if we could keep the public on side. Polling suggests that while this has obviously become a divisive cultural issue, most people have some sympathy for us. Particularly since Dan Needle changed his mind. The government was resting on his figures. But we'll have to wait and see. I think if the government don't change tack, they are in a very risky situation, because you're seeing farmers and the NFU, landowners and the CLA, and even environmentalists. George Monbiot has come out criticising the government for stopping capital grants. So you're seeing this unholy alliance of farmers, landowners, urban environmentalists, all of whom have very different cultures, all of whom have very different interests, and generally all of whom hate each other. And they're coming together against the government, which just shows how incompetent their management of these issues is. Inheritance tax either. They've frozen capital grant payments for environmental projects, which is what George Monbiot is annoyed about. They're talking about banning manure, potentially revising the guidance to stop muck spreading in autumn, but maybe all muck spreading flat out, which would just make agriculture impossible. They're also going to tax fertiliser, which would be the only alternative. There's a whole host of issues that the inheritance tax is clouding over, but we're not here just for one thing. This really is a massive problem.
OK, Ollie Fletcher, what a great guest. Thank you.
Chair. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. As Mr Byrne said earlier, in the long run we're all dead, so that tees me up rather nicely for a few questions about inheritance tax, and in particular the changes to agricultural property relief and business property relief announced by the Chancellor in the budget. Prime Minister, who were the targets for these changes? Was it the super rich sheltering wealth? Was it the family farmers, or was it both?
The purpose was to raise revenue in the budget, so it wasn't aimed at a particular group of individuals. Without going over it again, we inherited a really bad situation. We took the clear view that we couldn't hit the pay packets of working people. But we needed to raise revenue, because without raising revenue we couldn't have done what we're doing, for example, on the NHS, massive injection into the NHS, much needed. So the driving purpose, if you like, was to raise the necessary revenue from a number of different places, including this. But it wasn't targeted at this group or that group. What we tried to do with the regime we put in place was to protect the family farm, and then putting in a high threshold for inheritance tax for farms, which means that if you take the figures on the estates for farms, the vast majority of them are unaffected by the changes we put in place. But we weren't aiming at a particular group. Okay,
so it was a revenue-raising measure primarily. Does that mean that the government no longer adheres to the original purpose of these reliefs, which was to ensure the succession of family farm from generation to generation?
Well, no, we wanted to raise the revenue necessary, but also to recognise that family farms need to be protected, which is why, instead of taking the view which that this should all simply be the rules, as it were, that are applied to other inheritance, that there would be still special rules within it, with the thresholds that we put in place. And of course, the fact that even when the threshold triggers the payment of tax, that tax is paid at 50% the rate that other people would pay, and it's over a 10-year period interest-free. That's not available elsewhere, and so that's the fair balance between raising the revenue and the protection we want to put in place.
When it comes then to super rich people sheltering their wealth by buying land, that's still going to be quite an attractive option, isn't it?
Well, we weren't aiming at a particular group.
You don't think you're comfortable with the super rich sheltering their wealth by buying land?
Well, what we tried to do was get the balance right and to protect the family farm. You know, look, what the very wealthy do with their money within the rules is a matter for them. But what we wanted to do was to raise the revenue necessary, because we had to not only balance the books in the budget, we had to make important investments in things like health services in schools. That meant we had to raise revenue, and that's why we did this amongst other measures. But at the same time, we wanted to put in thresholds that ensures in the average case, the vast majority of farms, family farms, could be passed on without being affected by the inheritance tax. That was the scheme and the purpose of it.
So how many family farms do you think are going to be caught by this?
Well, we've been through the figures on this, and just to rattle through...
I can help you here. HMRC say that there were about 500 claims for agricultural property relief.
Yeah. So
is that a robust figure for those who will be caught?
That is a robust figure. It's published by the Treasury, certified by the OBR. Currently, as I think you know, 73% of APR claims are less than £1 million, and 40% of APR goes to the 7% wealthiest claimants, and therefore I'm confident that this gets the balance right between raising the revenue that we needed to, but also protecting most of the estates.
The changes apply not just to agricultural property relief, they also apply to business property relief, do they not?
Yes.
Now, in practice, the figure that you've given us, 500 estates there, does not include estates where the land would have been passed on using business property relief, does it?
Well, I think that it does. I'll certainly go away.
No, I can assure you that it doesn't.
Well, the figure of 73% of APR claims are less than £1 million is a figure both from the Treasury and certified by the OBR. And I'm confident
as those who have had agricultural property relief. You can certainly come back to it.
Yeah.
If you are satisfied, Prime Minister, that 500 figure is not as robust as it may appear, and a lot of people have changed their mind on that in recent weeks, would you persuade the Chancellor to meet with the farming unions, because she has refused to do that thus far?
Well, I met, as you probably know, with the NFU President just a few weeks ago. Met actually previously on a number of occasions with his predecessor, and there's no issue with meeting. Of course there isn't.
Well, but for the Chancellor of the Exchequer?
Well, that'll be a matter for her, but there's no in principle. I mean, I myself met the President of the NFU, and I think that... Well,
is it an example that you will be encouraging the Chancellor to follow?
Well, look, the Chancellor will manage her own diary, but I mean, I took the view...
Well, I mean, we're laughing here, but, you know, we had one witness giving evidence to the Select Committee who, when talking about the impact on his farming business, broke down.
Yep.
So there are a lot of people who don't find this funny. How does it make you feel to hear that witnesses were breaking down before my Select Committee?
Well, of course nobody's comfortable with that, but that is why I took the decision to have a meeting with the President of the NFU, to invite him in for a meeting with me, not with a great fanfare, but just for a private meeting, so that I could hear for myself first-hand from him as to the points that he wanted to make, understandably.
With a view to making changes?
I'm sorry?
With a view to making changes?
Well, no, we've got the policy, we've set out the policy, and I was clear about that, but did I want to hear what he had to say in a respectful way? Yes, of course I did.
Thank you very much.